Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm wrapping up all of the books that I read in May. So May turned out to be kind of lower than average reading month for me, in that I read about the same number of books that I typically read, but I was reading a lot more shorter things, and I actually didn't read a single physical book in May. I think I read all the ebooks and one audiobook, or maybe two audiobooks. But that was really working out for me. I was really thriving with ebooks and shorter things because I kind of continued my trend from April where I was doing a lot of crafting. So I finished this wrap that I've been weaving for a while now, and I also finished a shawl I was making for my mom that actually started in October, I think. So I was really pleased with that, and I was glad that I had the time to put towards those projects. So I just ended up reading a little bit less, just page count wise, but I generally liked everything I read, so it was still a pretty good reading month. And since I don't have anything to hold up this month, no physical books, I thought instead that today's video would be pretty chill, and I have brought along my current knitting project because I did start a new one. I just finished blocking the shawl that I had made last night, I think. I took it off the blocking boards last night, and so now I'm working on this little guy. This is a Age of Brass and Steam. I always get that confused. I want to call it Steam and Brass. This is an Age of Brass and Steam kerchief, which is a pattern from Orange Flower Yarn, in case you were curious. This will be the kind of top, the middle of the top of it, and it kind of increases out to the sides. So that is the start of that, using this really beautiful blue variegated yarn. This is Sweet Georgia Superwash DK in Hot Springs, I believe, and I got this from the mystery bag sale that they do every year, where they sell skeins that didn't meet their kind of quality standard in the first round but are still good skeins. So they've got some small mistakes in them and things like that, but they sell them at a discounted rate once a year in a mystery bag. So I got this really beautiful blues, and one of my aunts loves blue. It's her favorite color, so this is a gift for her. So I've just started this yesterday evening, and I'm really enjoying it. I've made one of these before that I wear pretty frequently, so I really love this pattern. But yeah, I thought I would just do a little bit of knitting. Please don't mind my absolutely wild way of holding my yarn, and do that while we're chatting about these books. Okay, so the first book that I read in May was The Man with the Glass Eye by Cole McCade. This is the third book in the Criminal Intention series, which is a kind of crime procedural, slow burn, romantic suspense series, and I'm absolutely loving this series. I've really enjoyed every book in this series so far, and the same was true for The Man with the Glass Eye. I think this was a really good entry in the series. This one is following the leads of the series, Malcolm and Songjae, as they are investigating a series of apparent hits that take them back towards familiar faces. There's some familiar people that start to get drawn in at this point, and this series is structured like a TV show, so it very much feels like a TV show as these different characters that we've seen before kind of get pulled back in. It's all surrounding this mystery, and I just really enjoyed the way that the mystery was set up. I liked the clues that they found felt very logical. It felt like one of those where you could kind of figure out what was going on if you're paying attention, even though you didn't have every clue laid out for you. So I really like that in a mystery, so I enjoyed the mystery in this one, as I have for the other books in the series. I also really enjoyed the directions that Malcolm and Songjae's relationship took in this book. This is, as I said, a romantic suspense series, so there's a slow burn romance between the leads. But I liked the ways that their relationship developed through the course of this book. I think that they both went through a lot of growth in this book that was interesting in kind of understanding themselves and how their relationship is impacting their work. Then the second book that I read was one of the Goodreads Choice books from last year. This was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And I think this was amongst my least favorite things I read this month. I didn't dislike it. I think I gave it 3 stars. I just didn't think that it was well developed character-wise. A lot of the characters felt very much like caricatures and not in a fun way. There'd be multiple Russian characters that all had the same personality, multiple Chinese characters that all had the same personality, but then there's also an alien character that is extremely well developed. It felt like you could clearly tell which of the two timelines was Andy Weir's favorite to write, and the other ones just did not get as much character development as I think they really needed. Especially because there's a lot of stuff setting up for emotional impact in some of the events in the other timeline, and I just don't think that that was set up well. It just didn't really land for me. I also think that the humor of this didn't really land for me, so I'm a little nervous now because I also have The Martian on audio that I've been meaning to read for ages, and I'm not sure how excited I am for that book now. I know it's been really popular, but I think that Andy Weir's humor just doesn't really land well for me. It's just not my sense of humor. So I do see why a lot of people really loved this. It is a very funny book in a lot of ways. It's got a lot of jokes. It's got some really fun characters, for sure. I just think that some of them needed some more development, and it just didn't kind of mesh with my sense of humor very well. Also, if you want to see more of my thoughts where I go a little more in depth on this book, I will link that video as soon as it's finished. It just occurred to me I don't think that video is done yet, but it'll be going up sometime after this one, but I will try to remember to come back and link that here. The third book that I read in May was Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey, and I enjoyed this one more than I was expecting. I read The Echo Wife a couple of months ago and didn't really like it all that much, but I ended up liking Upright Women Wanted a lot better. So this is a novella following a girl named Esther, I believe, as she runs away, and it's a dystopian version of future America, and she runs away after her best friend, who she was in love with, is executed, and joins the librarians, who are these women who travel across the kind of uninhabited portions of the United States as they exist now, and distribute approved materials. And so she ends up joining the librarians, thinking that that they'll be able to kind of teach her how to be what she considers like an upright woman, like be someone who can fit in with the expectations of their society, and ends up finding out a lot about the librarians and goes on this kind of adventure with them across the Wild West. So it was just a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the character dynamics in this. There's Esther, and then there's 3 librarians that she meets. There's a lot of queer characters in this that I thought were just given a lot of complexity and depth of character, and there was just so many, like, emotional moments in this. There were lots of parts of this book that made me laugh. There were a lot of parts of this book that made me kind of tear up a little bit. I really enjoyed Esther's journey of kind of growing to accept herself and love herself, and realizing that maybe it's not her that's broken, it's the system that's broken. And I just really enjoyed that journey for her. It was really well written, and I really enjoyed this. Then I read Constance, which I think was another one of the Goodreads Choice books. And this one is a clone thriller set in, again, kind of a... This one's not quite a dystopian America, it's just like a future America. But it follows a woman named Constance who, kind of in the wake of the death of several of her friends who they were all in a band together, she's still struggling with depression and trying to figure out how to kind of pick up her life and move on from that. But in the midst of all of that, she's also given a clone by her aunt who invented clones, and ends up one day waking up as her clone, which means that she's died. And so she needs to figure out how she died, why she died, what happened, because the circumstances of her waking up are very unusual. She wakes up 18 months out of date, she is missing 18 months of her memories, and her clone should not have actually been able to wake up 18 months out of date like that. So there's a lot of mysteries happening, because there's the mystery of, like, how did she wake up as a clone? There's also the mystery of, like, why did she die in the first place? I thought this was really interesting, and it grapples a lot with the idea of, like, are clones people, but not in the way that I've read in other books, like with The Echo Wife in particular, which touches on that a little bit. This book very much takes a stance that, like, clones are people, but it's asking more of the question of, like, are clones the same people as they were, as the original person was? Like, if Constance is a clone now, is the clone the same person as the original Constance, or is she a different person? So I thought it was a really interesting question, and I like that the book gives you a bunch of different possible answers. There's a bunch of different characters with different perspectives on that, and different perspectives on cloning technology as a whole, whether it's good or bad, whether it's, you know, true immortality or if it's something else. There were a lot of interesting ideas in this book, and I really enjoyed it. I also thought the thriller elements were well done. It was just fun to read about Constance investigating her own murder. I thought that was a fun premise. And there is a sequel coming out later this year, I believe, so I actually am really excited for that as well. I think that this is a really interesting world that Matthew Fitzsimmons has built. I don't think I mentioned the author's name before. It's Matthew Fitzsimmons. But I think the world he's built is really interesting, and I don't even know if the next book follows the same character, if it's somebody else within the same world. But regardless, I'm really interested to see what he does in the next book, because I just really enjoyed both the premise and the execution of this book. I just thought it was really interesting and well done. Okay, so after that, I read Confessions by Kanai Minato, which is a translated, I don't even know if I want to call it a thriller or a horror or suspense. It's a revenge story, and it's about this teacher who is retiring from teaching after the death of her 4-year-old daughter, who died on the campus of the school that she teaches at. And she's giving this last lecture to her students. And in that last lecture, she reveals that some of her students were responsible for the death of her daughter. And that's all I really want to say, because this book is very shocking and has a lot of twists in it. But that's kind of the general setup, is that this teacher is giving this lecture and revealing her revenge plot for what she's going to do about these students who have killed her child. And I really enjoyed this one. I didn't know what to expect because I've never read anything from Kanai Minato before. She has one other book that I'm actually hoping to pick up. And I also have never read from this particular subgenre. I looked it up. This book is a part of a subgenre that I can't remember the word for it, but translated to English, it translates roughly to like mystery, which I think is a really interesting idea for a subgenre. But basically the premise is that books in this subgenre are very shocking and kind of explore humanity's darker impulses. And so I thought that this was a really fascinating read. And the way that this book plays out, the format that it's told in, the format is basically like the teacher is speaking to the students, and it's written as if it's a monologue. Like, this book is her lecture. It's a monologue to her students. So you have her like reacting to things that other people are saying. It was just a really interesting format and an interesting way of telling the story. And I think that the way that that format was used to kind of slowly unravel the different bits of what was happening, and as the story goes on, you're slowly peeling back layers and upon layers of detail on this situation and learning a little bit more as you go along until you kind of get to the final shocking revelation at the end of the book. So I thought this was really interesting, and I do want to pick up Kanai Minato's other book, Penance, I think it's called. So I really enjoyed this, and I picked this up for the Literally Dead Book Club, which is hosted by Books and Lala, if you haven't heard of it before. And I just really enjoyed this. I'm glad that I picked it up. I don't think I would have picked it up otherwise if it hadn't been a pick for her book club. And this was also the first time that I actually have managed to pick up a book club book during the month that they're reading it and get to like participate in the conversation. So that was really fun as well. Then the penultimate book that I read was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This was another Goodreads choice book that I needed to get to for my kind of ongoing project. And I enjoyed this one a lot more than I anticipated. I had not really wanted to read A Deadly Education because there were so many mixed reviews when it first came out, and I really don't care all that much about like a magic school setting. I just don't care for them. But hang on a second. Loud can opening noise. Have me a drink. I don't care about magic schools. I just really don't. And so I wasn't thinking I was going to pick this one up, but then it was one of the Goodreads choice books, so I needed to for my project. And I'm glad I did, actually. I think that this book is really interesting, and I totally see why it's gotten so many mixed reviews. Because this book is very much a character study of its protagonist. The series is following Elle, who is a young wizard who has an affinity for dark sorcery, and she's kind of an outcast. And she's at this place called the Scholomance, which is a school for wizard children, where basically there are no teachers. and they have to learn everything based on materials that the school itself provides. But the school is also filled with monsters called Maleficaria that are trying to eat the wizard children because they like to snack on mana. And so all of these like wizard kids doing magic are a great source of mana. And so it's following Elle as she is navigating kind of the social and political climate of her school and trying to find friends or at least allies to survive, because when they graduate, she's in her 3rd year in the first book, but when they graduate, the students have to fight their way out of the graduation hall, which is full of Maleficaria. And so the book is just a case study of Elle and like what her affinity does to her, kind of, where her affinity makes her an outcast because people can sense that she's good at dark magic. So it's about like the implications of her affinity. There's also a prophecy foretelling that she's going to like destroy the enclaves or something, which are a part of the political system of the outside world. And so there's kind of a look at the psychological implications of her having that on her shoulders, this prophecy that she's known about since she was a very young child. And it's about her just navigating the context of her school during this time. And I thought it was really interesting because it actually starts 3 weeks from the end of her 3rd year, which is her penultimate year. And I thought that was an interesting choice because it wasn't her like discovering magic or finding out that she's a wizard, but just looking at her role in a larger system that she's been a part of for years and kind of looking at particularly class divides as they exist in that world. So I thought this was fascinating because I love character work stuff like that, but I definitely see why this didn't appeal to a lot of people because it is very character study heavy and there is basically no macro plot. It's just about Elle during this time at the school, because the school itself is extremely isolated from the outside world. They only get news in once a year, so it's really interesting in its project and scope, but I do see that it wouldn't appeal to a lot of people, especially if you're a plot reader. You would probably not like this book because there is like no plot. And then the last book that I read this month was Rolling in the Deep by Mira Grant. This is a brief kind of short story or novella. I think it's like 30 pages, and it's a prequel to her sci-fi horror book Into the Drowning Deep, which is about killer mermaids. So Into the Drowning Deep is following a group of people put on this ship to investigate the disappearance of an earlier ship that was sent out to make a mockumentary. That ship is called the Atargatis, and this Rolling in the Deep story is the story of the Atargatis. So we actually get to see what happened on the Atargatis during its original trip and what happened to all the people who were missing when the ship itself was found later. So I thought this was an interesting idea. I think this one was maybe written for Into the Drowning Deep. I'm not certain of that, but I think if you're going to read one of the two, read Into the Drowning Deep, because this was very short and it felt very rushed through, particularly the end of it. It sets up at a kind of a slow pace where you're meeting all of the characters and kind of finding out what each one of them is good at, and then it's a very rushed ending, and I just didn't think that it paid off its setup very well. But I also kind of already knew what was going to happen because I've already read Into the Drowning Deep, so that may have been part of my disappointment with it. But I do think that of the two, Into the Drowning Deep is better, and if you want killer mermaid horror, just read Into the Drowning Deep, because that's the better version of it. But it was still like well written and everything. I just think that this short story isn't really worth reading when you can read the longer book. But those are all of the books that I read in May. All of them were ebooks and audiobooks, which is extremely unusual for me, especially with audiobooks. I don't normally read a lot of audiobooks. I just struggle to pay attention to them. But I really enjoyed kind of taking a break this month and reading more ebooks and audiobooks, not reading as much physically, and doing a little more crafting. And I think that that trend is likely to continue into June. I am participating in Whatever-thon in June, but I am just kind of taking it easy and not trying to stress myself out too much about it. But if you made it this far in this video, is there like a ball of yarn emoji? Leave me a ball of yarn emoji because I've been knitting through this whole video. And let me know your thoughts on any of the books that I read down below, or any of the books that you're hoping to read. I'd love to hear that. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.